Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Missy Anthony. I'm a member of the Education Committee, and I am delighted to welcome you to Navigating the Path of a Credential Evaluation for Physical Therapists. As a board executive, a very important topic. I wouldn't want to do this myself. In this session, participants will gain a new perspective on the educational credential evaluation process that foreign educated physical therapists must follow when seeking licensure in the United States. This information should help prepare individuals to better guide and support foreign educated individuals seeking licensure in your jurisdiction. The speakers for this session are Jamie Nolan and Miles Kiben. Thank you. Jamie Nolan is the Managing Director of the Foreign Credentialing Commission on Physical Therapy, and Miles Kiben is a member of the SCC Board of Directors, and you can find their bios on the event app. They have valuable information to share, and we also encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A portion, the members of the Education Committee will provide you with a microphone. This is a rule that says right here. So please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so more attendees can have a chance to ask questions. At the end of the session, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation, and we value your feedback. And so now I turn the presentation over to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Missy. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad to see some new faces and some faces that I recognize. So welcome. So we are going to start out with a few Slido polls. I know that you are very familiar with this by now, but if you want to get your phones out, take a picture of the QR code. Once I move to the next slide is when you will see the question. Give you a few minutes. Okay, and the first question is, in the past year, how many emails, phone calls from foreign educated physical therapists has your board received regarding how to be licensed in your jurisdiction? You have the options of 1 to 5, 0, 6 to 10, or 11 or more. All right, look at that, 11 or more. That's a lot. All right, we'll move on to the next one. What is the most common question that you struggle to answer from the foreign educated physical therapist? This question is going to hopefully help guide me for next year to know what issues your jurisdictions are encountering with foreign educated, so that education, next year can be more guided toward that. Visa questions, MPTE, do I qualify? That's one I hear all the time. English proficiency, that's a big one. Why do I have to take courses when I've been practicing for 10 years? That's a good one as well. Oh, how do I waive the TOEFL? I get that 20 times a day. All right, we'll move on to our final question. Of the phone calls or emails that you received, how many were you able to fully assist with the process? 100% of the time, 75, 25%? Not at all? %75 seems to be the winner so far. That's a great number. So you guys are pretty knowledgeable. That's good news. I like that too. That is a good answer. All right, well, thank you for participating in the slides. I'm going to turn it over to Miles at this point. She has gone through this process, so she has some great insight.
All right. Hello, everybody. You can hear me well, right? I hesitate to come over here because I'm vertically challenged and all you'll hear is my voice. And I hesitate to use a microphone because I always feel like I'm going to do karaoke, which we might want to do later on. So welcome, and thanks for being here this afternoon. It's late in the afternoon. I give you some context because I am on the board, the FCCPT board, but the insights I bring to you is one because, believe it or not, and fun fact, I am and forever will be known and classified as a foreign educated therapist. And I'll give you context for that. I have 4 degrees, 3 of them in physical therapy, 1 in research primarily. All I received except for 1 here in the United States. My clinical practice has been primarily here in the US, and yet I am and will forever be classified as a foreign educated therapist. And there are some pros and cons to that, and we can talk about that later on. But I want to share with you, Jamie was so great to ask me, to share some perspectives on what the process is like to be licensed as a therapist here in the United States, and give you some idea on how to humanize the process, because all you hear is probably a phone call or a person from some other part of the world. So what are the steps? Now, let me preface this by saying it looks very linear, doesn't it? It's step 1, 2, 3, all the way to step 8. However, the reality is it's not linear at all. So I will discuss the process with you in a very linear fashion, but you will later find out that most likely these are happening all at the same time or concurrently with each other. And later on, if you have questions, I'm going to give you to our expert and see how that process comes. So what's the first step? Now, this is not linear. This really is truly the first step. And that is, you're going to apply to get a job in the United States. Now, there are many pathways to do that. The most common for foreign educated therapists is to go through a third party, or basically a recruiter. This recruiter will be our liaison between the candidate and between the hospital or clinic where they will eventually be involved in or employed. As a candidate, we typically don't have direct contact with the hospital or the clinic up until the time that we are in the United States. It's the recruiter that takes care of that. Not all candidates go through a recruiter. Again, plus and minuses with that. But this is one of the fastest and most typical way because they know the ins and outs with licensure. They will be in contact with the regulators and the state boards. They'll be in touch with the hospital or organization, and they'll also be in touch with FCCPT. Okay? So the next step, after you get a recruiter, or you can go at it by yourself. I want a state, I want to go to this state and practice. The next step then, let's go and do that because we've done that, is now go and look at the state where you want to practice. In most cases, the recruiter will give you an idea where you're going to work at. In my case, guess where my first practice was? They told me it was in the first national park in the United States. Say that again? No, I didn't know that either. I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I thought, Hot Springs, Arkansas, looks beautiful. They showed me a VHS tape. For those of you who are old enough to know what a VHS tape was. And I was sold because I love nature. Everything in that tape I finished and did in 1 week. I stayed in Arkansas for over 12 years. So when I started saying y'all, I thought it was time to go. And then I moved to Texas. And everybody says y'all there every day. Now, you all know that each state has their own requirements, and that's going to be very dependent on what your policies are and your regulations are. But as a candidate, we need to fix that. We need to meet that. And a recruiter will help us go through those steps, and we'll go through all the requirements that might include fees. It might include background checks, Most of the states will require an English proficiency, which we will discuss in a little bit, and sometimes an interview or a jurisprudence exam. Not all states do that. Okay, now you've identified where you're going to work and what the state requirements are. Now comes the hairy part. You're going to go through a visa application. And this is where a recruiter or a third-party person will eventually be a little bit easier. However, there are people who do it on their own, and that means they're going to apply for a work visa. What does that entail? Every foreign educated healthcare professional, nursing, physical therapist, doctor, will need to come here on an H-1B visa. That means an organization will need to sponsor us, saying, we really need your expertise, and we cannot find a US person to do that. It gets hairy because there's only so many numbers of H-1B visas that they allow every year, and the regulations and the laws change depending on the political landscape. The other step that needs to happen is a visa screen certification. Okay? Some places need this, not everybody does it, but what it requires is they're going to look at they're going to verify basically your credentials, your licenses, your past licenses, if you're already licensed in your country, your education, credentials, and everything else. And Jamie will go a little bit deeper into that in a little bit. Okay, while that is going on, I'm going to go and move to the next step, which is most every individual, most every state, most every hospital will require you to get an English verification or a proof of proficiency. TOEFL, or the test of English proficiency, in some cases the TSE is already in the TOEFL, correct? Now it is.
Yes, the IBT TOEFL now
Yep.
includes the speaking section.
So the test of spoken English. So again, that's the next step. That might be ongoing at the same time everything else is happening on the background. And I heard there's some buzz over the use of or the exam for TOEFL, and we can probably discuss that later on. There are some nice things about not doing the TOEFL. If you are from one of these countries stated here, typically you're not required to take an English proficiency. Everything else, or every other country, you will need to provide one or take one. Then the next step, I've done all of those, then comes the big and very heavy part of, well, now I need to get my credentials. It's moving really fast for me right now. I know.
You're giving up my
We'll
slides.
just say it's Halloween still, and we're gonna want it to go
Close your eyes
backwards.
for a minute.
Right. It's still Happy Halloween,
right,
so we'll
there
go
you
there. Perfect. So now what you want to do is go through an education evaluation. So what does that mean? You have to provide all your education credentials, the proof that you did your education in physical therapy in whatever country you're from. And you're going to submit that to a licensing or verification company, such as FCCPT, to have your credentials reviewed. This is a necessary step to get licensed, to take the boards. You cannot get away with it. So what does that mean? All yours.
So first of all, you have to apply to FCCPT. This is the front page of our website where you can see that you can apply now. So all of our applications are online. We do offer many different services, and sometimes it is difficult for our applicants to know what service they want, and we have to help them navigate through that process. We do have a wizard on our website that indicates, do you want an evaluation for immigration or do you want it for licensure? And then depending on what they check, they answer maybe one or two more questions, and then it'll present to the applicants or potential applicants what service is required for that particular jurisdiction or for immigration. So we do refer our applicants to that a lot. So once they apply and they have the application into us, we go through the document collection process. And this is the process that can take a long time, depending on, where the documents are coming from, many different factors. All applicants must have documents sent to us directly by their school. We only deal with primary service documents when we're evaluating transcripts and syllabi. There are some documents that the applicant has to submit as well, and those documents are uploaded or mailed to us. We have an upload function on our website where they can upload the documents that they have to submit to us. Right now, the institutions cannot upload on our website, but we are working on an institution portal that is in a pilot program. Once we get the documents, I have a team of evaluators who are highly trained in document authentication. And they use current standard industry standards to authenticate the documents. So what are industry standards? What does that mean? So again, I mentioned we do only use primary source documents, so we have to make sure that the documents are coming to us directly from the school. And when it's mailed to us, it's, taking that envelope and looking at it and looking at the stamps, the postmarks, the return address, all of that, in order to make sure it's directly from the school. With emails, because of COVID, we really had to move into an email, and that's a little trickier, right? So we have to make sure that the person who's sending us the document is somebody that we can authenticate as the right person to send it. That's either searching the university's website, that's emailing the university, that's emailing the person who sent us the document, saying you need to provide to us the information that proves that you are the correct person to send this document to us. We also have a lot of documents, and so we have a lot of internal references that we use as well in order to make sure that we're getting documents from the correct person. We also do validation of the seals and stamps on the documents. They're very consistent, and so we need to make sure that they are what they need to be. The signatures of the registrar or whomever signs the documents, in some country it's the dean, some it's the principal. But again, we look at our internal resources, previous documents, and we compare those items, the signatures, the seals, the stamps. And then we look at the school recognition. We want to make sure that the school is recognized within the country. Typically that means the Ministry of Education, because accreditation is really a US concept. So we don't see a whole lot of accrediting bodies outside of the US. Some schools are recognized by the Ministry of Health. So we have to know that. In each country, what entity recognizes schools. And then we do a program validation. We want to make sure that this program or this school really did have a PT program when this individual attended. So we have to go through that research in order to make sure that it is a legitimate program. And then when all the documents are received, we're able to start the evaluation process. And this can take anywhere from 1 month to collect up to 12 months or longer. Sometimes we don't even get all the documents, unfortunately. But this could be a long process for our applicants. Once we have all the documents, we then move into our first part of the evaluation, and that is the general education evaluation. The general education reviewer, they are the person who sets up the evaluation or the report for our PT evaluator. They're the ones who knows the country, the educational systems in all the other countries. They know the grading systems. They know the credit conversions. They know how to convert all that information to the US system. They determine what coursework tool is going to be used. Because as it's been mentioned many times, every jurisdiction has a different requirement. And not all jurisdictions accept the same coursework tool. So we have to know where, that's why Miles says it's very important to know where you're going, where you want to work, because every state is different, and that really drives this entire evaluation process. So the gen ed reviewers, determine that. They set up the coursework tool, they set up the credit conversions, they set up the grade conversions, and then they place any courses that are not specifically related to physical therapy, what we call gen ed courses. Your chemistries, your physics, your humanities, what our students domestically got in their bachelor's degree. Once that part is done, then we move it on to our professional therapy or physical therapy education evaluator, our subject matter expert, if you will. And then this individual, they have the task of reading the syllabi from every program. And we have syllabi that come in that are 900 to 1,000 pages long. So if you can imagine reading that day in and day out, it takes a special person to do that. And the person that we have is very special and very good. And so they take the coursework tool and the guidelines, and they review the transcript and the syllabus, and then they place all the courses in the professional education. And then we have one final person to check the work of both the general ed reviewer and the PT reviewer. And this is our credential manager. So we have at minimum 3 people who look at any evaluation in order to check the quality, make sure that we're doing it right, and just to ensure that it's consistent with what we've done in the past as well. We want to make sure that we have consistent, accurate evaluations. And then this is the favorite part of our applicants, is when it's completed and we get to email a secured PDF file to the jurisdiction. And the applicant also gets a copy of the evaluation as well. So once the evaluation is completed, and I'm sure you probably get this question a lot, and there are deficiencies, how do they make up those deficiencies? What can they do as an applicant to remediate any areas that we found deficient? And so we also offer a service to help them navigate this process, and it's called the PLAN service. Plan, Learning, and Assistant Network. We love our acronyms here. We do have 3 levels of plan services depending on what the applicant needs. If an applicant only has 1 or 2 deficiencies, we have a very, quick plan incremental program where they get a worksheet, tells them where they can take the courses, and then that's all they get. This particular service doesn't have pre-approval of the courses as the other 2 do. The Plan Standard and Plan Plus both have pre-approval of courses. So what that means is they work directly with the plan advisor, and they take a look at all the courses that we have as resources that they can take for their specific deficiencies. And then they can, communicate back and forth with the plan advisor with, well, I want to take this one, but it's not open, so I think I'm going to take this one. And so they finalize what they're going to take, and the plan advisor pre-approves it. So that guarantees that applicant that if they take the course, that it's going to meet the deficiency that they have. And then with the Plan Plus service, that is our highest level of the service. It also includes the reeval. So once the individual has gone through the plan, has got this pre-approved worksheet with, you know, the names of the courses and the schools where they're going to take the courses, then once they take them, they get through all that, they can come back and they don't pay any extra for that reeval because it was already included in that initial plan service fee. All right, I will turn it back over to Miles, and she will go through the rest of the process. Question over here, can we get a mic, please?
Catch?
I just had one quick one. How long has the plan service been available?
Plan service has been available for over 10 years.
Surprised?
And so all of the people that go through you know that exists?
Yes, because when we send their completed evaluation out, we include, if they're not equivalent, we include a plan brochure with the email we send them.
I've been on the board in Florida as a member for, I don't know, 4 years now, and not one that has come to us thinking that we're suddenly just going to grant them whatever they want. Act as if they've ever heard about your plan. They come in to use the vernacular. They come in playing Mickey the Dunce, thinking that we're just going to give them whatever they want.
That's good feedback for us. I will say that we do assume that they're reading the brochure that's attached to the email, which may be a big assumption. So maybe there's other ways that we need to promote this. We do some social media posts and include our plan service on that. But we'll always look in new ways to get that information out to our applicants.
Okay, that's exactly what I was experiencing as well. And recently we took the full application to the board for review, and the board suggested the individual contact you again and follow up. I did not have this information, so this will be excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. I will say a lot of our applicants, this is a paid service, right? And I think that might discourage some applicants. But I must say it's well worth the cost because it's guaranteeing that they're taking the right courses. And it's really guiding them in a way that is important, I think, and in a way that's not wasting their time and money.
In Ohio, we have instruction specific for internationally trained individuals that includes information about the plan service. So that might be something to consider asking your administrators about. And I think
while we're at it, could I just dovetail on this, that Jamie really opened my eyes for North Carolina because we were trying to do some of this, but what she alerted me to is that you can, you might be being helpful in the moment, but people try to move to another state, they haven't gotten that credentials evaluation that is equivalent so that another state would see that. And that's like the nail in the coffin to what we were doing previously. Thank you.
Oh. Yeah, what Kathy is saying, it's very important that they have that equivalent evaluation. So if your state board is saying, oh, just take this course and we'll accept it, and not coming back through the evaluation process, when they move to another state, they don't have that course on their evaluation or that equivalent evaluation.
I have a question. So how much is the people paying for this service?
Just
It differs, right? There are 3 levels. So of course the highest level is the most expensive, and we do have a fee schedule on our website.
Okay, and the second one, it says, what about the documents or the syllables that are coming in a different language? Do you offer the translation for that one, or a person has to do translation for that one? The person has to do it?
Yeah.
But that's not going to come from the school. From the
Our
other school?
process for translation is that we require the documents in the original language if they don't issue English language documents, and they come to us directly, and then we provide those documents to the applicants with instructions on translations.
Okay, so the documents come from the school to you, and you give it to the person to be translated?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is?
Correct.
And they have to translate everything?
We require a professional translator to have it
Because you got
translated.
certified interpreter
Correct.
for that?
Yes, the applicant cannot do their own translation.
Oh, well, yes, but then they have to take them to a different entity or person to translate those documents and then pass it back. So it's another step that is not in there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we're going to keep going. One more question.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify because I'm not sure if I missed this, but when you get evaluation done, it's kind of like you've translated a foreign language into the American standards language so that that one evaluation could be used in any state. You don't like need a different one for each state.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I was gonna say,
Again, each state
as a required.
has their own requirements, and they use different versions of the coursework tool, right? So a lot of times we can, do different versions of the coursework tool using the same set of documents. But it could be a different version that they have to be evaluated under.
Please hold your thoughts on that, because when we go to, now you can practice. I would love to talk to you about, remember, I'm always going to be a foreign educated therapist. So now what happens if I now in 20 years of practice in the US and I decide to move states? So that's a different conversation for later on. But let's say for posterity's sake, so one route was you found deficiencies, you've communicated, and you took that service from FCCPT, done. The other route is you have no deficiencies. Yay, you're ready to go. So the next part is you're ready to take the board exams. You cannot take the board exams until that evaluation clears. But once it's clear, you can take the board exams, and all board exams are in the United States. So hopefully at this time, your visa went through, you have an H-1B, you can fly to the United States, take the exam. If not, there are candidates that go to the US on a tourist visa, take the exam, go back to their home country and wait until they get the H-1B visa that allows them to work. So you can see all the nuances, and by this time, how long have we been applying, right? Because now we put in the credentials review, now we put in all the exams, and if they had deficiencies, we're probably more than 6 months, going to a year at this point. So I hope you realize how challenging it can be for somebody to get to the United States and work here. It's not an easy process. So take the board exams, and to prepare for that, there are many ways to do that. There are board preparations. In some places in their home country, they can do that, or in some cases, they come to the US and again take the board exam preparations. Not a requirement, but very helpful if you want to look at, especially if you look at the pass rates for internationally trained and internationally educated therapists, it will be very helpful to get used to the questions, to get used to the content, and also the practices here in the US. Okay?
And the Federation does have the PEAT, which is a good tool for exam prep.
Yep, you can purchase that, and they take it. It's a practice exam. All right, took the boards. So waiting. What's next? Yay, you passed the board exam, and hopefully you now have not only a license, but you obtain a license, either a temporary license or you get your permanent license, depending on what state you're in. Some states offer a temp license, maybe while they're waiting for everything else to get settled in. Some will just give you a permanent license, and now you are ready to practice. And that is the last one, I think, where you get now a medal, because now you can go and practice as a therapist. Happy, right? No, not yet. Because depending on what state you're in, if you are a foreign educated applicant, you may need to practice under the supervision of a U.S. licensed physical therapist. And was it 14 states that currently require a foreign educated therapist who went through the whole process, passed the board exams, to now be supervised by a U.S. trained physical therapist? And that supervision can vary from 6 months to 1 year. But yes, you are now in the U.S. and you can practice in the U.S. So after that, and after your supervision, 6 months, 1 year, now you have a working visa, you can work and you can stay in that place up until the time comes that they either sponsor you for a green card or you take your H-1B sponsorship and another company or another state decides to sponsor you again. That's the only time that you can stay in the United States is while you have an H-1B that supports you or says, we need you to work in the workforce. All right, now comes, what are your questions after that? We wanted to give you a snippet of the process, but now is the time, what are your questions going through the process?
When you evaluate deficiencies and identify courses that could satisfy those deficiencies, are you validating courses that the applicants bring to you, or are you offering them courses? And how are you sure that then the credentialing board will accept your recommendations?
Very good question. We do both. We do have a list of institutions that we have a relationship with in the U.S. that offer transitional DPT programs that will allow our applicants to come in. Well, first of all, they participate in plan, the institutions, so we have evaluated their courses and their transitional DPT or whatever course they're willing to offer our applicants. We do have one DPT program, entry level, that will allow our applicants to come in and take 1 or 2 courses. That is highly unusual, as you know. The DPT is usually a lockstep program and you can't come in and out as a non-degree. So we highly rely on those transitional DPT programs. And our evaluators evaluate that information and we determine what deficiencies or what content is in each course. So then we can easily list those courses depending on what the deficiency is for the applicant. However, we do have applicants who are not in the US, and most of our resources that we have in plan are US based. Now, a lot of them are online, so sometimes they can take them if they're not in the US. But if they can find a course in their country that they think meets the requirement, then we'll work with them to get the syllabus from that school to see if we can review it and if does it meet our content. That doesn't happen as often. Most of our applicants are utilizing those transitional DPT courses.
This might seem like a silly question, but
No silly questions.
what is a green card?
A green card, it means that you're a naturalized citizen of the U.S.
Okay.
No? Oh, that's permanent resident. Permanent resident, you're right, thank you. So green card is next to, is prior to getting your permanent residence.
Wait.
So green card is permanent residency, where you can legally work in the U.S. regardless of what trade you are in and whatnot. Depending on how you got the green card, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, it takes shorter years to become a U.S. citizen. Versus if it's through employment, I think it's maybe, the last time I did it, I think was like 10 years. Or just a year? Without being married? 4 years, so it's shorter now. But a green card is just legally you are a resident of the U.S. you cannot vote. That is the singular thing you cannot do with a green card.
You have to be naturalized.
Jamie, question. Can you speak to somebody who lacks clinical hours and that's their deficiency and the challenge that may present?
That is by far the hardest deficiency that our applicants, have to make up. We have very limited sites in the U.S. that is going to take on a foreign educated therapist that hasn't gone through their program at all and place them in a clinic. So we do have one program that will work with us in our plan program to place applicants that do need some clinical education credits or hours. A lot of times the applicants might go back home to their institution and do, externships is sometimes what it's called, or just doing an additional internship through their program. That tends to be a little harder because, again, a lot of the programs aren't set up that way, where they won't allow these extra courses to come in and take it. We also have a provision in the guidelines where if they have work experience, that we can, there's very specific criteria they have to meet, and all this is in the coursework tool guidelines. And if they meet that criteria, we can give them up to 300 hours of clinical education based on that. And we do have to verify that information by whoever is supervising that PT. Good question. And we're always looking for more schools to participate with us and plan, especially if you have, clinical options.
So I just have two questions for you. One is for the lacking of coursework, do you ever allow or is there ever any continuing education type of coursework that would meet that requirement, or does it always have to be a credit-based university?
Typically, it's credit-based university, and it has to be part of a PT program. And it has to be, if it's in the U.S., it has to be a regionally accredited institution. We can't say it has to be from an accredited PT program because the transitional DPT, that degree is not accredited. But we do require the transitional DPT to be from a school that's regionally accredited and has an entry-level PT degree. There is one exception to that, and that is emergency procedures content. We will allow them to remediate that with the American Heart Association Basic Life Support Certificate. We do not give academic credit for that. We give content only for that course. Or it doesn't have to be that one specifically, but one similar to that has, hands-on experience. It's specific to healthcare providers or first responders. It can't just be your CPR for your layman.
And do you know of any states that don't require the NPTE?
No. Well, to practice?
You have to pass the boards.
Michigan has one, no, not one therapist. Michigan has some different regulations, depending on where you're licensed. Yes.
Is there any areas where it's particularly difficult, or is there any ones that are particularly similar that people have more success with or less success with?
That's a good question. Our education is at the DP standard, everybody knows, and it's not like that in the rest of the world. So a lot of our applicants have to remediate. I would say, there's some programs in Australia, some DPT programs, entry-level DPT programs in Australia that are very comparable to ours. And believe it or not, Pakistan's entry level is a DPT. Again, it's different than our DPT where they enter it directly out of high school. It is a 5-year program though. So they often are almost equivalent or equivalent. Sometimes they're missing credits, but a lot of the content is in those programs. But if you're coming to us with a bachelor's or a master's entry level, you're going to have to take additional courses. You're going to have to remediate. And our top 5 countries that we're dealing with is India, Philippines, Pakistan, Egypt, and Brazil. India and Philippines are always in 1 and 2 positions. Brazil is the one that has come up within our top 5 within the last 2 or 3 years.
So I've got a question that's a little bit of a one-off because of military in the way that North Carolina legislatures handled it. They have determined that military trained people, so you haven't necessarily gone through the full either PTA, well, it's really primarily PTA curriculum, but if you have gotten your military training and then maybe the person has already done some general education through another college or university, they require us within 15 days to tell that person whether they're eligible for licensure in North Carolina or not. And that is literally impossible unless we say you have to go do a educational credentials review somewhere and send it to us first, because I have had to feel like I've been in the position where they send all that stuff to us, but recognizing not really qualified to do all of that and don't have permission to use the coursework tools. So can you talk about that a little bit? Or
We've done a few evaluations for those trained in the military as a PTA. It's very hard. The documentation is pretty much non-existent. We can get documents from ACE, the American Council on Education, because they will, a lot of the military courses are validated by the ACE, and so we can sometimes get information, a transcript. I'm not sure I'll call it a transcript because it's not what you would typically consider a transcript, but it's, it will tell you, kind of the course they took and a little bit about it, but it is extremely difficult to evaluate those that were trained in the military just because of the documentation is lacking. You can't get a syllabi at all.
And I also don't know whether there's ever been any tracking done on those people who they're coming in kind of through that path and whether they can actually pass the test.
That's a good question.
North Carolina is a big military state, and we will do everything we can to try to help these people to achieve licensure. But so far, the 3 people that I think we've approved have not passed. So I don't know. I don't know how that really was that relevant to this conversation, but that's on my mind, and
Right.
what can we do?
Yeah, no questions on TOEFL. No TOEFL questions?
Oh, sure.
I'm here.
Can you talk a little bit about TOEFL at home?
TOEFL at home is just as it says, you take the TOEFL at home. They have a proctoring system program that is used, and they administer the test at home. It was started during COVID specifically, and it continues to gain, popularity. One of the issues we have is we no longer get paper copies of TOEFL. We have set it up with ETS where we get an electronic transmission of scores, and that electronic transmission doesn't tell us if they took the at-home test or not. So we do advise our applicants that they cannot take the at-home test.
And Jamie, can you talk about, you accept, because there's also different versions of the credential that you do that states might or might not accept. For instance, we no longer in Ohio accept the level 1,
Credentialing, coursework, maybe?
what is it, the
coursework tool?
No. The thing you need the TOEFL for. You don't,
The
you need the
type
TOEFL.
one?
Type 1,
visa.
thank
Yeah.
you. Take the type 1. In Ohio, we don't accept that anymore. So there's the type 1. There are other tools as well, correct?
Well, the type 1 is our service for immigration. And that service requires TOEFL, and USCIS has set those standards, what those scores are, the passing scores.
So
But
that's,
not others, like, if, we don't verify TOEFL for every jurisdiction. You know, we only verify TOEFL if they're coming through for immigration, and we have maybe 11 to maybe 14 states that has asked us to verify TOEFL, and so for those states, we will. So if we don't verify TOEFL for a state, it's either that they're doing their own verification or they don't require it.
So speaking of TOEFL, North Carolina adopted a set of standards that we believe that people need to pass in order to meet the English proficiency requirement. Okay, so I don't know if this is the right venue for this, but it appears as though other states or jurisdictions are dropping those requirements for, you know, a certain amount of clinical practice or maybe other ways of meeting that requirement. And in North Carolina, we've still felt really, really strongly about that, but as I have become aware about how we were handling the educational credential, I mean, is that very out of step with what is considered appropriate now? I mean, we're strong believers that, first of all, you're going to have a very hard time passing the test if you don't have a certain level of English skills. And then similarly, what are you going to do in clinical practice if you don't? So I don't know. Can you talk about that at all?
I would say that, you know, on a personal level, I think TOEFL is a great thing because you have to speak and understand English to practice in the US, right? And I feel that if they have a level of English proficiency, they're more likely to pass the NPTE. You know, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's just a personal opinion, but I think one of the reasons maybe that the pass rates for foreign educated is that language, you know, barrier. But not all states require the TOEFL. Some of them, you know, require different scores. You know, California requires the TOEFL, but it's different scores than what immigration does, right? So I think you just have to do what's best for your state, and because everybody is all over the board with the TOEFL and what they require.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Me?
Lauren,
I'm excited about
what
this.
did I say wrong?
Absolutely nothing. Just to give a little bit of background and information for folks interested in the TOEFL. A few years back, FSBPT convened a panel of folks to look at the TOEFL and determine was it still relevant, and if so, then what was the pattern of scores that we wanted to see in the TOEFL. That was facilitated by folks from ETS that came in and kind of described and showed examples of performance at each level, and they related that to required clinical knowledge and skills. So if you looked at that, one of the things that they said they didn't have to have a very high TOEFL score on was writing, right? Because of electronic health records. Writing is not as essential of a skill as is speaking, listening, reading. All those were seen as very important skills. And we have documentation of this. In fact, I think it's in the member resources. There you go, yeah. Ruth has the website scores up there. we have documentation in the members area that actually has performance level descriptors and says what clinical activities are required for each of those skills and how they relate to that TOEFL score. So it was a very thorough standard setting. I was really impressed that we did it. We also approached it as an open question as to whether or not we needed it at all, because we said, hey, you know, folks could be practicing in a community of their own that speak their own language, and we got very clearly back, no. You've got to work in a more coordinated healthcare system, and all that's going to be done in English. And so, you know, you can't just practice alone, and you can't do your continuing education without knowing some English. So that was important. We also had an open question of, is this required for PTAs? And if so, is the level the same or different? And again, the panel came back and said, absolutely, PTAs need the same level of English proficiency, and in many cases they're operating more independently because they're going into folks' homes and they don't have oversight, they don't have somebody that they can go back to and ask a question or ask to be a mediator in a conversation. So, you know, in my mind, it was a great panel. It was about half of the panel were foreign educated individuals. Ruth was there as well, one of the few foreign educated that was educated in English, but we did try to make sure we had a really fair panel from that perspective, so that it wasn't just a bunch of people saying, you know, we want a barrier. We wanted people that had a good perspective on it and a variety of diverse perspectives. And I think it was really, really great if you read the report that we have. And in fact, if you look at the member resource packet for eligibility, all this information is in there as well. So I think that's probably the number one resource to go to, because it goes through kind of all the eligibility rules. If anybody wants to append that, they're welcome to.
When was that done, Lauren?
We're actually due for an update of the member resource packet in 2024. I think the standard setting was in 2015. And so we may come back and revisit it, because our technical advisory panel has suggested that we periodically review that TOEFL standard. So we'll see. It may be coming up in the next couple of years that we'll revisit that. I think the work that we did last time was really strong, and so you know, it may be more of a confirmation of what we already have, but I don't expect things have changed too much since 2015.
Any other questions? Always. All right, so if there's no more, one more. Lauren.
I also wanted to add in that we do have a lot of research showing that our minimum TOEFL standard is highly correlated with passing the NPTE. We didn't set out to do that, but it does, because it is really strongly linked to what they have to know and do in the clinic. It really does relate very strongly to being able to get through the NPTE and answer the questions in a successful manner. So there really is a lot of evidence that folks who score under that really struggle to pass the NPTE.
Lauren, a question about that over here. Yeah. That you just called it a minimum TOEFL standard, but it's not a minimum standard to take the NPTE, meaning no, people do not have to submit their score in order to be approved, correct?
That's correct. So and I don't know how each individual state works, but you don't have to, under the current rules, you don't have to, for the NPTE, submit a TOEFL score to take the NPTE. Some states may require that you submit TOEFL scores in advance of having your eligibility approved, but you know, my guess is that they just expect the whole package to come in together.
Sure. I mean, in Ohio, we do, and what ends up happening oftentimes, we have a higher TOEFL than some other states. So there's shopping that happens.
Absolutely. And one thing that we do is if someone fails the NPTE by a certain amount, we actually direct them to go look at the TOEFL. So if they get a very low score on the NPTE, often those folks are people that, that really struggle with English proficiency. And our best advice is improve your English proficiency, because at that point, then we can start to give you feedback about like where you might be able to do better and worse. And again, we've got some evidence showing that the people that scored in that really low score range tended to kind of go away for a while before they could come back and pass. So they probably got some additional education and additional English proficiency.
I wanted to ask a question to Lauren, so if you could give him the mic back in regards to that. But in regards to the minimum score that you're talking about on that, how does that reflect against the minimum score for immigration? Because Alaska is one of those states that remove the requirement for the TOEFL. Statutorily, we require English proficiency, but we swapped it out through regulation by saying if you can pass the NPTE, then that counts for English proficiency. Because the way the board reasoned it out is that most of the people that come across have to take the TOEFL for immigration. So they felt it was a barrier to require the higher scores on TOEFL and make them take it again for Alaska.
Yeah, I think they're very comparable. And I don't remember if we changed the total score. The USCIS score is a total score, and ours requires you to hit certain minimums in each area. So in that case, you might hit the USCIS minimum score if you're a great writer, for example, but you can't produce the speech. That'd be me in Spanish, right? I can't speak Spanish very well, but very proficiently, but I can write it just fine. So it is possible to get the minimum USCIS score and not the minimum score that we recommend, but I think that's more the exception rather than the rule. Yeah, they're very comparable. They might even be the same total score.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I also work with the medical board in our state, and some legislatures around the country have passed international residency licensing laws, which it's a little bit similar to this, where you're taking a residency from a international jurisdiction and then you're licensing them in your state. That's a very broad overview of what's happening, but a couple things. One is I'm wondering if you can comment on any lessons learned in terms of fraud or attempts at fraud on this program that you maybe have caught or caught later. And then the other thing that we've been talking about is there's a cultural adaptation kind of a component to this where, you know, from international jurisdictions, laws may be different and quite different in some ways. Have you encountered any of that where you're kind of surprised that maybe it's acceptable in their home country to date their patients or something like that? So those are kind of two questions in there. Thanks.
The first question about fraud, fortunately, we haven't seen a lot of it since I've been at FCCPT. We have seen some, and I think the craziest case we had was when I was probably 2 or 3 years in my career at FCCPT, and we had an individual submitted a fraudulent registration to the Indian Association of Physiotherapists, which is a volunteer professional organization. They don't have to be registered with them in order to practice. So for somebody to, submit a fraudulent document for the registration was a little eye-opening. And then at the time, my staff was still answering our phones before we had a call center, and this applicant called in and was pretending to be the person who signed the form. So we do see fraud, right? And that's why we require primary source documents. We feel that hopefully eliminates some of the fraud. But it's difficult because sometimes fraud happens within the university. We had a case where somebody had stolen a signature stamp for a registrar. And so they were stamping all of these, this one was actually interesting too, because they were all legitimate students at this institution, and they had passed all the courses. However, it was taking the university a really long time for them to get us that information. So they took it upon themselves to create their own transcript and stamp it. And then we saw discrepancies within the transcripts. You know, my evaluator's just like, wait a minute. It says it passed here, but over here, it's, you know, it's not even completed yet. So what's going on? And, you know, and that's how we found that. But, you know, primary source documents, we stay on top of contemporary, you know, standards and industry standards. We go to professional development, and we require primary source documents to try to avoid fraud. Your second question, I really am not qualified to answer, because I really just do that credentialing part. So once they're done with that, it's difficult for me to answer. Yeah.
That would be more of a function of the state and the organization that they eventually practice with or affiliated with, to ensure that they follow code of conduct, code of ethics from the American Physical Therapy Association and the profession. So.
And some of the states, you know, have the jurisprudence exams that, you know, can test their knowledge of that. And, you know, if perhaps they don't have enough, they have some remediation.
I have a question. Given the DPT is the entry-level requirement for US, and most of the individuals, or the countries you described, they come from the bachelor's as theirs, what's the mean number of credit hours that they have to take to be equivalent?
So the Courseware Tool 6 requires a total of 170 semester credits. So if they're coming in with a 4-year bachelor's degree, that's approximately 128 credits. Right, so it's quite a few credits. Yeah. They have to be, they want to come here. I'll just say that, right? This is an investment. Mm-hmm. And this is, you know, this is a human behind the phone call who is trying to come here and work and have a better life maybe. And they're dedicated. You know, when I first started in 2001, we would do one coursework tool in one school, and that was it. Now the average is 2 or 3 coursework tools in probably 3 or 4 schools, because it takes that amount of education for them to meet that DPT standard. And with that, I was told to have 1 minute left.
1 minute.
Oh.
1 minute.
Oh, 4 minutes. Okay, we have any more questions?
Do you see very often, I just encountered this for the first time, and I wondered if it happens very often, but we have a pair of American students who chose to get their physical therapy education in a work-study program in Australia. Do you see that often?
Yes, we do. Because a lot of U.S., not a lot, but we do see U.S. people go outside of the United States to be educated. Mm-hmm. And what we also see is we see international being educated in U.S. DPT programs have to come through us for their immigration. So they're CAPTE graduates, right? So they don't need the evaluation in order to take the NPTE, but they need that healthcare worker's certificate in order to get that H-1B visa in order to work in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So we see that situation as well. There is a great program in Australia, Bond University, that
ding, ding, ding.
At least 1 or 2 Americans go through that cohort a year.
They may need to inform their students that they're going to have to go through this process, though.
Bond University does.
Okay,
I have
good.
a very good working relationship with Wayne, the program director there. We meet at least once a year.
Awesome.
And he is very dedicated to getting the Americans through this process. All right, with that, I just wanted to mention that there is a QR code for the evaluation. Please take time to fill that out. It does give us some great information. While you're doing that, I'll just make one more comment. We had mentioned, Miles said that she is always considered a foreign educated, and that is true, right? And, what your states could do is really look at your endorsement regulations and why is it different for foreign educated and domestic, especially if that individual has been practicing successfully in this country for 20 plus years. One of the most frustrating things for me is when a person comes through and has to have evaluation and they've practiced for 20 plus years, they're evaluated and then they're missing physics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to give that news to them. But that's what the regulations are for that state, where they have to meet this requirement. And, so a challenge for you guys to go back, talk about this with your board.
Mm-hmm.
Why are things differently? I firmly believe in the initial licensure process. Firmly believe that they have to be evaluated, credentialed. But once they've been here and working successfully, maybe we need to relook at how that process is working.
Please.
We have time for...
We're done, but just a comment, because I know one of the states you may be referring to that in regard is mine, which is Florida.
Yes, sir.
And understood, but it's in our statute. And that's up to the guys in the State House, not us. We can tell them, but we can't tell them much. And so, but the issue is that many times these applicants, they know this, they don't believe our board staff, and they request an appearance before the board. And we have to look at them, and sometimes there'll be 3 people in the gallery, and we have to tell the first one, look, we have no control over this because it's not a rule, it's a statute, and we can't change that. So then the other 2 people wave and say goodbye and they leave. But think about it. They needed to go CLEP a physics course someplace, and they paid for an airline ticket to fly from Michigan down to Florida, and they could have used that money to go to the community college and take a physics class.
True. I think one of the challenges with that, though, and to give you a real-life example, and you will hear this from many foreign educated therapists, when I moved to Texas, and by then I already had 10 years licensed in the United States, treating multiple patients, teaching in a university in Arkansas, board certified clinical specialist. At that time, I was an item writer for the national board exams. Go to Texas. Guess what? They want me to take the TOEFL again. And they did request my initial evaluation from FCCPT. And it was a long conversation to have it waived. Because I was like, I've been seeing patients. I teach. I'm this, I'm that. I have several licenses. I think one of the things you have to consider is you've seen how rigorous the process is and how strict it is, yes? So why is it that if I'm licensed in Arkansas, if I go to Texas, why don't they believe that to be enough and vetted, that I've been through the process? Why? It makes it easier, I think, with a compact.
As long as you have to stay in your home state.
Yes.
Right? You can't move. Right? You have a privilege for the other state, but
So I'd like to give a perfect example. You don't have to cross a state. I got licensed in Oregon in 1992. The administrative rules changed. If I allowed it to lapse or just cross, lapse and come back, I would have been asked last year to take the TOEFL, even if I practiced in Oregon.
For years.
Excuse me? No, but just wrap your brain with that. We had to fix that in administrative rule because the rules changed from the time I got granted a license in 92, stayed in the same jurisdiction, the rules change.
And in the same note, the different rules is the different use of the coursework tool. Some states use the most recent coursework tool. Some go with the coursework tool as the time that you graduated. And I can't imagine being an applicant and being approved in 4 states, and then I move to a new state and I don't meet the requirements because I'm being evaluated based on a coursework tool that's old and has completely different requirements. Wait a minute, I meet it on the new ones, but I don't meet it on the old ones, which is kind of where we are right now. And the board is looking at how can we make an exception and not be found in an audit finding. So how do you look at that person as a person, but still stay within the regulations and the statutes? It's a very interesting conversation.
It is. We have many states that will require coursework tool 6 for initial licensure. But for endorsement, you can use, the coursework tool based on your graduation.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have states who you can use a coursework tool based on your graduation in order to get access to the MPT.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right, it is varied, and we struggle with it. I can't imagine how our applicants, are struggling with it. So that's why we try to have this wizard to help them on the website.
Yeah, it seems very arbitrary and unfair from their standpoint, and as a regulator, it's very hard for me to overcome that objection.
Yeah.
And, I am constantly finding myself, I apologize. I wish that I could give you a solution, but I can't.
Right. All right, and with that,
Thank you,
we are out
everybody.
of time. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
joining. Evaluation.